Hello there. You're listening to The Planet's Memory, where time breathes and the Earth remembers. Close your eyes and imagine yourself standing at the entrance of a cave that has remained hidden from sunlight for tens of thousands of years. The air is cool and heavy with the weight of time itself, and as you step forward into the darkness, your flickering torch reveals something that stops your breath in your chest. There on the walls, painted with pigments made from earth and bone and blood, are images that seem to whisper secrets from a world that vanished before history began. These are not simple drawings made by primitive hands seeking only to capture the animals they hunted. These paintings hold something far more profound, something that has puzzled scientists and archaeologists and dreamers for generations. What if these ancient images are not merely art at all, but rather precise maps of a lost world, a civilization, a landscape that existed when ice covered half the planet and humanity was still finding its voice in the darkness? What if our ancestors left us not just pictures, but coordinates, pathways, instructions for finding something that was precious beyond measure, something they desperately wanted future generations to discover? Tonight, as you drift into sleep, we will journey together through the depths of time, in caves and caverns where human hands touched stone and left their mark. And we will explore the extraordinary possibility that Ice Age cave paintings are maps leading us toward a world we have forgotten, a world that waits in silence for us to finally understand what our ancestors were trying to tell us across the vast ocean of millennia. The story of these cave paintings begins not in the moment they were created, but in the moment they were rediscovered, pulled from obscurity, and thrust into the light of modern understanding. For countless centuries, these images slept undisturbed in the belly of the earth. Known only to the occasional wanderer or animal seeking shelter, their significance lost to the passage of time. Then came the explorers and the scientists, equipped with lanterns and curiosity, who ventured into the depths and found themselves face to face with humanity's earliest known artistic expressions. The paintings showed magnificent beasts, creatures of power and grace, animals that once roamed freely across landscapes now buried beneath ice or transformed beyond recognition. There were bison with curved horns and shaggy coats, horses running in great herds, mammoths with their distinctive curved tusks, cave lions with muscles rippling beneath their fur, and deer with antlers spreading like the branches of ancient trees. The artists who created these images possessed an understanding of animal anatomy and movement that rivals anything produced in the modern age, their lines flowing with confidence and accuracy that speaks of intimate knowledge born from observation and survival. When archaeologists first began studying these caves in earnest during the 19th and 20th centuries, they approached the paintings with assumptions shaped by their own cultural understanding of what primitive humans must have been like. They saw the images as hunting magic, ritualistic attempts to ensure successful hunts by capturing the essence of prey animals on stone surfaces deep underground, where sacred ceremonies might take place away from the dangers of the outer world. This interpretation seemed logical and fit neatly into existing theories about early human behavior and belief systems. The caves were classified as sanctuaries, spiritual spaces where shamans might have led ceremonies, where young hunters might have been initiated into adulthood, where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds grew thin enough to cross. For decades, this explanation satisfied most scholars, and the paintings were understood primarily as religious or magical expressions, beautiful but ultimately straightforward in their purpose. Yet as more caves were discovered and more paintings were documented and studied with increasingly sophisticated tools and methods, certain patterns began to emerge that troubled the neat simplicity of the hunting magic theory. Researchers noticed that the paintings were not randomly distributed throughout the caves, but instead appeared in specific locations that seemed deliberately chosen. Some images were placed in the most accessible chambers near entrances, where light could still penetrate, while others were hidden in narrow passages that required crawling through tight spaces or navigating dangerous drops and climbs. The effort required to reach some of these painted chambers was extraordinary, suggesting that the act of creating these images in these particular locations held significance beyond simple artistic expression or religious ritual. Why would ancient artists struggle through hundreds of meters of treacherous underground passages, risking life and limb in absolute darkness, just to paint an image on a wall that few, if any, people would ever see? The answer that began to form in the minds of some researchers was that perhaps these locations themselves were important, that the paintings marked specific places for specific reasons, that they served a purpose more practical than spiritual, though the two might not have been entirely separate in the minds of Ice Age peoples. The materials used to create these ancient paintings tell their own story about the dedication and intention behind their creation. The artists ground minerals and rocks into fine powders, creating pigments in shades of red and yellow and brown from iron oxides, black from manganese dioxide or charcoal, and occasionally white from calcite or kaolin. They mixed these powders with binding agents that might have included animal fat, blood, urine, or plant extracts, creating paints that could be applied with brushes made from animal hair, blown through hollow bones or reeds to create a spray effect, or applied directly with fingers and palms. The resulting images have survived for periods ranging from 15,000 to more than 30,000 years, protected by the stable environment within the caves where temperature and humidity remained relatively constant, where no sunlight could fade the colours, where the touch of wind and rain could not erode the surfaces. The durability of these paintings across such vast spans of time speaks to both the quality of the materials used and the protection afforded by their underground locations. When researchers began to analyze the chemical composition of these ancient pigments using modern spectroscopic techniques, they discovered that the artists were not simply gathering whatever colored earth they happened to find nearby. Instead, they were selecting specific minerals with particular properties, sometimes traveling considerable distances to obtain materials that would produce exactly the shades and textures they desired. This level of intentionality and planning contradicts the image of primitive humans creating spontaneous expressions of hunting magic or spiritual impulse. These were carefully planned projects that required knowledge of geology and chemistry, understanding of which materials would bond to stone surfaces and remain stable over time, and the ability to organize expeditions to gather resources from specific locations. The sophistication evident in the technical aspects of these paintings extends to their execution, where the artists demonstrated mastery of perspective, shading, and the use of natural contours in the rock surfaces to create three-dimensional effects that make the animals appear to move in flickering torchlight. The positioning and orientation of individual figures within larger compositions also reveal deliberate planning and potentially encoded information. In some caves, animals are arranged in ways that seem to tell stories or document relationships between species, predator and prey grouped together, young animals shown alongside adults in family groups, seasonal behaviors captured in sequential images that trace migration patterns or breeding cycles. These arrangements could simply represent observations of the natural world, but they could also contain more specific information about where and when certain animals could be found, what their behaviors were during different times of year, and how to successfully track and hunt them. If we consider the possibility that these paintings served as teaching tools, passing knowledge from one generation to the next, then they become a form of visual encyclopedia, preserving crucial survival information in a format that could be understood regardless of spoken language, which may have varied significantly between different groups of Ice Age peoples. Some researchers have proposed that certain recurring symbols and abstract marks found alongside the figurative animal paintings might represent early forms of notation or proto-writing, attempts to record information using standardized symbols that carried meaning beyond simple representation. These marks include dots, lines, grids, checkerboards, and various geometric shapes that appear repeatedly across different caves and different time periods, sometimes spanning thousands of years and hundreds of kilometers. The consistency of these symbols across vast geographical areas and lengthy time spans suggests they may have formed a shared system of communication, a visual language that different groups could understand even if their spoken languages were mutually unintelligible. If this interpretation is correct, then these symbols might function like labels or keys, providing information about the figurative images they accompany, potentially indicating quantities, directions, time periods, or other data essential to understanding the paintings as maps or guides rather than merely artistic expressions. The three-dimensional nature of the cave environments themselves may also play a crucial role in understanding the paintings as maps. Unlike modern two-dimensional maps drawn on flat surfaces, these ancient images exist within complex three-dimensional spaces, where the shape and topology of the cave passages and chambers might themselves represent geographical features of the outside world. Narrow corridors could correspond to valleys or mountain passes, large chambers to open plains or gathering places, vertical shafts to cliffs or waterfalls, underground streams to surface rivers. If the caves were chosen or used specifically because their internal geography mirrored external landscapes in meaningful ways, then the paintings within them would serve as markers or labels identifying specific locations within that three-dimensional map. This possibility transforms the caves from mere canvases into actual models of the world above, created at a scale that allowed people to walk through and physically experience the relationships between different locations before embarking on journeys across the actual landscape. To understand what these potential maps might be documenting, we must first understand the world in which they were created, a world profoundly different from our own, yet familiar to anyone who has experienced the raw power of nature, unconstrained by civilization. During the height of the last ice age, which reached its maximum extent approximately 20,000 years ago, ice sheets kilometers thick covered much of northern Europe, Asia, and North America, locking away so much water that global sea levels dropped by more than 100 meters below present-day levels. This dramatic lowering of the oceans exposed vast expanses of land that are now submerged beneath coastal waters, creating land masses and connections between continents that no longer exist. The English Channel was dry land forming part of a continuous plain stretching from what is now Britain to France and beyond. The Bering Strait was a wide bridge of tundra connecting Asia to North America, allowing both animals and humans to migrate freely between continents. The Mediterranean Sea was significantly smaller, with many islands connected to the mainland, and rivers cut deep valleys through the exposed continental shelves as they flowed toward ocean basins much farther from present coastlines. The landscapes that existed between the ice sheets and the equatorial regions were nothing like the familiar geography we know today. Where temperate forests now grow, there was open tundra and grassland dotted with hardy shrubs and seasonal wildflowers that bloomed briefly during the short summers. These were the mammoth steppes, vast ecosystems that supported enormous populations of large herbivores unlike anything that survives in the modern world. Woolly mammoths travelled in herds that might have numbered in the thousands, their migrations following seasonal patterns that took them across hundreds of kilometres as they searched for fresh grazing. Alongside them moved equally impressive herds of woolly rhinoceros, giant deer with antlers spanning nearly 4 metres, steppe bison larger and more powerful than any surviving bovine species, and several species of horses that would not survive the end of the Ice Age. These herbivores in turn supported populations of predators that have since vanished into extinction, including cave lions that were perhaps 25% larger than modern African lions. Giant short-faced bears that stood over 3 meters tall when upright, packs of dire wolves, and the powerful cave hyenas whose bone-crushing jaws left their marks on countless fossils. Humans lived in this world not as masters but as participants, one predator among many, dependent on their intelligence and social cooperation to survive, in competition with creatures far stronger and often faster than they were. The human populations of the Ice Age were small and scattered, consisting of mobile bands that moved with the seasons and the migrations of the animals they hunted, gathering at certain times of year in larger aggregations where multiple bands would meet to trade, arrange marriages, share information, and participate in ceremonies that reinforced social bonds and cultural identity. These gatherings were crucial for survival because they allowed the exchange of knowledge about where resources could be found, which routes were safe to travel, where dangers lurked, and how to predict the movements of the great herds that provided meat and hides and bone for tools. The information shared at these gatherings needed to be remembered and passed on to future generations, and in a world without writing as we understand it, visual memory aids would have been invaluable. The seasonal movements of Ice Age peoples were not random wanderings, but carefully planned journeys along routes that had been established over generations, perhaps over thousands of years. These routes connected important resource locations, including places where high-quality stone could be obtained for tool-making, river crossings where migrating animals could be ambushed, seasonal camps where certain plants could be gathered at the right time of year, and sacred sites where ceremonies were performed and social gatherings occurred. The knowledge of these routes and the locations along them represented the accumulated wisdom of countless generations, information so valuable that its loss could mean death for an entire band. How could such crucial information be preserved and passed from generation to generation in a society without written language, where a single harsh winter or failed hunt might kill everyone who held certain knowledge in their memories? The answer might lie in the permanent record created on the walls of caves, where the stone itself became an archive that could outlast any human lifespan, where information could be stored and retrieved by those who knew how to read the visual language inscribed there. The climate during the Ice Age was not static, but fluctuated considerably over time, with periods of extreme cold alternating with somewhat warmer interludes when the ice sheets retreated and conditions became more hospitable. These climatic shifts would have profoundly affected the landscape, changing the distribution of plants and animals, altering the courses of rivers, opening or closing particular routes of travel, and forcing human populations to adapt their movements and strategies accordingly. Information about how the land changed during these climatic cycles, which routes remained passable, where water could be found during droughts, which caves provided shelter during the worst storms, would have been precious beyond measure. If the cave paintings documented not just the current state of the landscape, but also recorded information about how things had been in the past, or predictions about how they might change in the future, they would have served as a kind of time capsule, allowing people to learn from the experiences of their ancestors who had lived through previous climatic cycles. As researchers compiled catalogues of cave paintings from sites across Europe and began to compare them systematically, they noticed patterns that could not be easily explained by the hunting magic theory alone. Certain combinations of animals appeared together repeatedly, while other combinations that might seem equally logical were absent or rare. For example, horses and bison are frequently paired together in the same panels or chambers, appearing in this combination far more often than would be expected if the animals were simply being portrayed randomly or according to their actual abundance in the environment. Similarly, certain animals that were known to be common in the Ice Age bestiary and that were regularly hunted and consumed are rarely or never depicted in the cave paintings. Reindeer bones are abundant in the archaeological deposits at many cave sites, indicating that these animals were a dietary staple, yet reindeer images are relatively uncommon in the painted galleries. This discrepancy between what people ate and what they painted suggests that the paintings were not simple representations of the hunt or the food supply. The placement of different animal species within the cave systems also shows non-random patterns. In many caves, the deepest and most difficult to reach chambers contain paintings of large predators or dangerous animals, while the more accessible areas feature herbivores. Some researchers have interpreted this as evidence of hierarchical organization, with the dangerous or powerful animals occupying sacred or significant spaces deep within the earth. But it could also indicate a mapping system where the depth within the cave corresponds to distance or difficulty of travel in the outside world, with the most dangerous animals marking locations that were distant or perilous to reach. If we imagine the cave system as a kind of three-dimensional map, then the placement of a cave lion painting in a deep, difficult-to-access chamber might indicate that cave lions inhabited a region that was far from the home territory of the people who created the map, requiring significant and dangerous travel to reach. Statistical analyses of the distributions and associations of different animals in cave art have revealed patterns that some researchers believe are too structured to be coincidental. These patterns might represent a deliberate organizational system, a way of encoding information about relationships between animals, locations, seasons, or other variables important for survival. One particularly intriguing pattern involves the positioning of animals relative to natural features of the cave walls. In many cases, artists deliberately incorporated cracks, protrusions, hollows, and other irregularities in the rock surface into their compositions, using these features to add dimensionality or to represent specific aspects of the animal such as hearts, breath, wounds, or movement. This integration of natural rock features into the painted images suggests that the artists were not simply looking for convenient blank spaces to paint on, but were deliberately seeking out rocks with particular characteristics that would enhance or complete their compositions in specific ways. If we extend this observation and consider the possibility that the natural features of the caves were being used as part of an information encoding system, then the entire cave becomes a complex data structure where painted images, natural rock features, and the three-dimensional architecture of the space itself all work together to convey meaning. A painting of a bison placed next to a particular type of rock formation might indicate that bison could be found near that type of geological feature in the actual landscape. A series of dots painted leading away from an animal image might show the direction of travel to reach a location where that animal was abundant. A handprint placed at a specific juncture where passages split might mark a decision point where travelers needed to choose between routes, with subsequent paintings in each passage indicating what lay in those directions. These interpretations remain speculative, but they offer a framework for understanding the cave paintings as something far more sophisticated than simple art or religious expression. The consistent use of certain conventions across multiple caves separated by considerable distances provides further evidence for the existence of a shared system of visual communication. Animals are almost always shown in profile view, which maximizes the information content by clearly showing the head, body, and legs in a way that makes the species immediately identifiable. Perspective and scale are handled in ways that suggest the artists were following established rules rather than experimenting freely. Multiple animals are often shown in register, arranged in horizontal lines or bands that might represent different time periods, different locations, or different categories of information. These conventions are similar across caves that were painted over spans of thousands of years and across regions spanning hundreds or thousands of kilometers, suggesting that the knowledge of how to create these images was being passed down through generations and shared between different groups. Maintaining consistency that would only be necessary if the images served a communicative function that required others to be able to interpret them accurately. In recent decades, some researchers have begun applying mathematical and geometric analysis to cave paintings, looking for patterns and relationships that might not be immediately obvious to the naked eye. These analyses have revealed some startling discoveries that lend support to the map hypothesis. When the positions of paintings within certain caves are plotted and analysed, they sometimes show geometric relationships including alignments, regular spacings, and proportional relationships that appear too precise to be accidental. In some cases, the painted images seem to mark points along geometric patterns such as grids, triangulations, or radial arrangements that might represent actual geographical relationships between locations in the landscape above. One particularly compelling example comes from a cave system in southwestern France, where detailed mapping of all the painted figures revealed that they were positioned according to a grid pattern with remarkable regularity. The spacing between major painted panels corresponded to a consistent unit of measurement, and the distances between different types of animals followed rational proportions. When researchers overlaid this grid onto topographic maps of the surrounding landscape, they found that the proportions matched the actual distances between known Ice Age habitation sites, seasonal camps, and resource locations. The caves themselves might have been chosen specifically because their internal dimensions and proportions corresponded to the geography of the territory that the local human population regularly traversed, allowing the cave to function as a scale model of that territory. Other geometric analyses have focused on the orientations and sightlines within the caves, examining where people would have stood to view particular paintings, and what natural features of the cave would have been visible from those viewing positions. In some cases, paintings are positioned so that they can only be properly viewed from specific locations, and from those locations, other features of the cave, such as passages, shafts, or distinctive rock formations, align in ways that might correspond to landmarks or directional bearings in the outside world. If an observer stood at a particular spot and looked at a painting of a mammoth, and from that same spot a narrow shaft in the cave ceiling pointed toward a particular direction, that might indicate the direction in which mammoths could be found from some reference point in the actual landscape. The incorporation of astronomical alignments into some cave systems provides another layer of potential encoded information. Several caves have entrance passages or interior chambers oriented, so that sunlight penetrates to illuminate specific paintings only at particular times of year, such as the solstices or equinoxes. These solar alignments would have provided a reliable calendar, marking the passage of seasons and indicating when certain activities should be undertaken, such as when to begin seasonal migrations, when certain plants would be ready to harvest, or when animals would be gathering for mating rituals. If the paintings illuminated by these seasonal light events depicted the animals or plants that were most important during those seasons, the cave would function as an almanac, a visual calendar encoding the annual cycle of subsistence activities essential for survival. The acoustic properties of the caves add yet another dimension to the information that might be encoded in these spaces. Researchers have discovered that in many painted caves, the locations with the most impressive paintings also have distinctive acoustic characteristics. These locations might produce strong echoes, resonance at certain frequencies, or other sound effects that would have been noticed and likely considered significant by the people who used the caves. Some researchers have proposed that the paintings and the acoustic properties are related, that certain locations were chosen for painting precisely because they had these special sonic characteristics, and that ceremonies or teachings associated with the paintings might have incorporated sound as a mnemonic device, using the acoustic distinctiveness of each location to help people remember the information associated with the paintings there. If songs or chants were used to encode navigational information or other crucial knowledge, and if these songs were performed in specific locations within the caves where the acoustics enhanced or modified the sound in memorable ways, then the combination of visual and auditory elements would create a powerful multi-sensory memory system. Among the most enigmatic elements of cave art are the handprints and hand stencils that appear alongside the animal figures and abstract symbols. These marks, created by placing a hand against the wall and blowing pigment around it to create a negative image, or by covering the hand in pigment and pressing it directly to the stone, appear in caves throughout the world wherever prehistoric peoples created rock art. For a long time, these handprints were interpreted simply as signatures, the artists marking their presence or claiming ownership of their work. However, more careful study has revealed that the handprints contain information that might be far more significant than simple identification. Detailed analysis of the handprints shows that they are not randomly distributed, but tend to appear in specific contexts and configurations. In many cases, handprints cluster near paintings of certain animals or at particular junctures in the cave system, such as where passages branch or where chambers open into larger spaces. This positioning suggests that the handprints might function as indicators or markers, drawing attention to specific paintings or locations, perhaps indicating directions or marking waypoints along a route through the cave that corresponds to a route through the outside landscape. Some handprints appear to be pointing in specific directions, fingers oriented to indicate a particular passage or feature, functioning like arrows or directional signs in a modern wayfinding system. The individuals who made these handprints can sometimes be identified by comparing the sizes and proportions of the hands, and researchers have found evidence that the same individuals returned to caves multiple times over periods of years to add new prints or to place prints in different locations. This pattern suggests that creating handprints was not a one-time ritual act, but an ongoing activity, perhaps part of a regular practice of updating or maintaining the information encoded in the cave. If the handprints served as personal markers indicating who had travelled to certain locations or who had knowledge of particular routes or resources, then over time the accumulation of handprints would create a record of collective knowledge, showing which paths were well known and frequently travelled versus which were rarely visited and might be dangerous or unrewarding. Some of the most intriguing handprints are those that appear to be mutilated, showing fingers that are bent, missing, or otherwise deformed. For many years, these unusual handprints were thought to represent actual injuries or deformities, but statistical analysis has shown that the patterns of missing or bent fingers are not consistent with the random distribution of injuries that would be expected in a population. Instead, the patterns suggest that the finger positions are deliberate, perhaps representing a system of hand signals used for communication. If different configurations of extended and folded fingers conveyed specific meanings, then the hand stencils could be encoding information numerically or symbolically, much like sign language or the finger counting system still used in various cultures around the world. The colours used for handprints also vary in ways that might be meaningful. While many handprints are made with the same red or black pigments used for the animal paintings, others use rare colours or special mixtures that stand out distinctly. These unusual handprints might mark particularly important locations or might indicate something special about the individual who made them, perhaps denoting a person of high status, specialised knowledge or particular experience. If different colours were used systematically to encode different types of information, then the handprints become part of a visual code that adds another layer of meaning to the cave's overall communicative system. The physical effort required to create handprints in some locations is extraordinary, with prints appearing on high ceilings that could only be reached by constructing scaffolding or by boosting people up on the shoulders of others, and in narrow crevices where a person would have had to squeeze into extremely uncomfortable positions to place their hand against the stone. This effort argues against casual or spontaneous creation and suggests that placing handprints in these difficult locations served an important purpose. If the location of each handprint was meaningful, corresponding to a specific place or waypoint in the landscape, then the difficulty of reaching that location within the cave might represent or correspond to the difficulty of reaching the corresponding location in the outside world, with the most challenging to reach handprints marking the most remote or dangerous destinations. The dating of cave paintings has evolved considerably over the decades as new techniques have been developed and refined. Early attempts to determine the age of paintings relied primarily on stylistic comparisons and correlation with archaeological deposits in the caves. But these methods could only provide rough estimates and were subject to considerable uncertainty. The development of radiocarbon dating revolutionized the field by allowing organic materials in the paint, particularly charcoal used for black pigments, to be directly dated with reasonable precision. More recently, uranium-thorium dating of the mineral deposits that have formed over some paintings has provided minimum ages for the artworks, establishing that they must be at least as old as the mineral layers covering them. these dating techniques have revealed that cave art spans an enormous period of time, with the oldest known examples extending back more than 40,000 years, and creation of new paintings continuing until approximately 10,000 years ago, when the Ice Age ended and the climate warmed dramatically, transforming the landscapes and driving many of the large Ice Age animals to extinction. This 30,000-year span represents a period longer than the entire span of recorded human history, from the invention of writing to the present day. Throughout this immense period, the tradition of creating paintings in deep caves persisted, suggesting that whatever function these paintings served was important enough to be maintained across hundreds of generations despite enormous changes in climate, environment, and likely in human culture and social organization as well. Within this long chronology, researchers have identified distinct phases and regional traditions characterized by different styles, techniques, and subject matter. Early paintings tend to be simpler and more schematic, while later works show increasing sophistication in technique and complexity in composition. However, the fundamental conventions remain remarkably consistent, with animals shown in profile, certain species appearing repeatedly, while others are rare or absent, and the same types of abstract symbols appearing throughout the entire span. This continuity suggests that the knowledge of how to create these paintings and what they meant was being passed down through the generations in a stable cultural tradition that maintained its core elements even as stylistic details evolved. The distribution of painted caves across the landscape shows patterns that might reflect territorial boundaries, migration routes, or the locations of important gathering places. Clusters of painted caves occur in certain regions, particularly in southwestern France and northern Spain, where dozens of sites are found within relatively small areas. These clusters might indicate regions where human populations were particularly dense or stable, where multiple bands regularly gathered, or where the landscape contained features that made it especially important for Ice Age peoples. The spacing between painted caves within these clusters is often remarkably regular, with caves occurring at intervals that would represent reasonable travel distances for people moving through the territory on foot, perhaps marking stages along regular migration routes, or the territories of different bands who maintain the caves as permanent records of their knowledge and claims to the land. Beyond the painted caves of Europe, similar traditions of rock art appear in other parts of the world, including Africa, Australia, Asia, and the Americas, each with their own chronologies, styles, and local characteristics, but sharing fundamental similarities that suggest similar functions and meanings. The rock art of the Aboriginal Australians, for instance, includes not only depictions of animals and abstract symbols, but also explicit maps showing water sources, travel routes, and territorial boundaries, created according to conventions that have been maintained and understood continuously for tens of thousands of years, because the knowledge encoded in these paintings remains relevant for survival in harsh desert environments. The existence of these living rock art traditions provides crucial insights into how similar practices might have functioned in Ice Age Europe, demonstrating that rock art can indeed serve as a practical information storage and retrieval system capable of preserving crucial knowledge across countless generations. If we accept the hypothesis that cave paintings might function as maps or information storage systems, then the next challenge is to develop methods for reading and interpreting them, for extracting the information that might be encoded in the images, symbols, and spatial relationships. This task is made enormously difficult by the vast gulf of time separating us from the creators of these paintings, and the profound differences between their world and ours, their ways of thinking and perceiving, and the knowledge they possessed that we have lost. We cannot simply apply modern cartographic conventions to interpret these potential maps, because those conventions are cultural constructs that would have been meaningless to Ice Age peoples who had entirely different mental models of space and place. One approach to interpretation involves working backward from what we know about the landscape as it existed during the Ice Age, and comparing that with the patterns visible in the cave paintings. using geological evidence, paleoclimate data, and fossil distributions. Researchers can reconstruct the environments that existed around painted caves during the periods when the paintings were created. They can identify where different animal species would have lived, where water sources would have been located, where seasonal food resources would have been available, and how the landscape would have changed with the seasons and over longer climatic cycles. By creating these reconstructions, and then looking for correspondences between the reconstructed landscapes and the patterns in the cave paintings, researchers can test whether the paintings contain information that correlates with real geographic features and ecological relationships. Some researchers have attempted to use ethnographic data from more recent hunter-gatherer societies to inform their interpretations of cave paintings, looking for parallels in how these societies encode and transmit knowledge about landscape and resources. Many traditional societies that lived as mobile hunter-gatherers until recent times developed sophisticated systems for mapping and remembering territory, systems that often relied on visual symbols, songlines that encoded routes through landscape features, and ceremonial knowledge that was restricted to initiates who had proven themselves worthy of receiving it. While we must be cautious about drawing direct parallels between modern hunter-gatherers and Ice Age Europeans separated by tens of thousands of years and living in completely different environments, these ethnographic examples demonstrate the range of possibilities for how non-literate societies can encode and preserve complex spatial and ecological information. The challenge of interpretation is complicated by the fact that we do not know what reference frame or orientation system the Ice Age artists might have used. Modern maps typically use a consistent orientation such as north at the top, but this convention is arbitrary and culturally specific. Ice Age peoples might have oriented their maps relative to the sun's path, or to prevailing winds, or to the flow of major rivers, or to the direction of seasonal migrations, or using some other reference system that made sense in their world, but that we would not automatically recognize. Without knowing the reference frame, even if we correctly identify that certain paintings represent a map, we might not be able to orient that map correctly to match it with the actual landscape it represents. Another layer of difficulty comes from the fact that the paintings were not created all at once, but accumulated over hundreds or thousands of years as different artists added new images to the caves. Some images overlay or interact with earlier ones, creating palimpsests where multiple layers of meaning might be superimposed. Later artists might have been adding new information, updating older maps to reflect changed conditions, or they might have been participating in the same tradition without fully understanding the original meanings of earlier images, adding new paintings according to conventions they had learned, but whose original purpose had been forgotten. Distinguishing between these possibilities requires careful analysis of the stratigraphy of the paintings, determining which images are older and which are newer, and looking for patterns in how they relate to each other. If the cave paintings are indeed maps, then what territory are they mapping, and what features are they marking? The most straightforward interpretation would be that they map the territories regularly inhabited and travelled by the groups who created them, marking locations of camps, hunting grounds, water sources, toolstone outcrops, and other important resources. However, some researchers have proposed more ambitious interpretations, suggesting that at least some cave paintings might map much larger territories, perhaps documenting long-distance journeys, trade routes connecting distant regions, or even recording knowledge about lands far beyond the everyday range of the people who created the paintings, information that might have been passed down through generations or obtained through rare long-distant contacts with other groups. The possibility that some paintings might document now submerged coastal regions is particularly intriguing. During the height of the Ice Age, when sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than today, extensive coastal plains existed that are now deep underwater. These coastal plains would have provided rich habitats with abundant resources, and they might have been preferentially inhabited by human populations who could exploit both marine and terrestrial resources. The flooding of these regions as the ice sheets melted and sea levels rose would have destroyed countless archaeological sites and potentially displaced large populations, forcing them to retreat to higher ground. If some cave paintings were created by people who had once lived on these coastal plains, or who had received information from ancestors who lived there, then the paintings might contain the only surviving record of those lost landscapes and the knowledge of the peoples who inhabited them. Testing this hypothesis is enormously challenging because the relevant coastal regions are now submerged beneath tens of meters of water, often covered by sediment and difficult to access for archaeological investigation. However, recent advances in underwater archaeology and in mapping submerged landscapes using sonar and other remote sensing techniques have begun to reveal the topography of these drowned lands. In some cases, features that look like river valleys, lake basins, and even possible human-made structures have been identified on the submerged continental shelves. If detailed maps of these submerged landscapes could be created and compared with the patterns in cave paintings from nearby sites, it might be possible to identify correlations that would support the hypothesis that some cave paintings document these lost coastal worlds. Another dimension of the lost geography potentially recorded in cave paintings relates to the locations of now extinct Ice Age megafauna. The animals that once roamed the Mammoth Steppes were not randomly distributed, but had specific habitat preferences and seasonal movement patterns. Mammoths preferred open grasslands. Woolly rhinos favoured wetter areas with more shrubby vegetation. Giant deer lived in forest edges and parklands, and cave lions followed the herds of herbivores that were their primary prey. These habitats shifted as the climate fluctuated, and the animals moved with them, sometimes over very long distances. Knowledge of where different animals could be found at different times of year would have been crucial for hunting peoples, and documenting this knowledge in permanent form would have ensured it could be passed to future generations. If cave paintings mark the locations where different species were typically found, then they might allow us to reconstruct the biogeography of Ice Age Europe in much finer detail than would be possible from fossil evidence alone. The paintings might also document spiritual or mythological geography, mapping not just physical locations but also places of power or significance in the belief systems of Ice Age peoples. Sacred mountains, springs believed to connect with the underworld, places where spirits were thought to dwell, or locations where important events in creation mythology were believed to have occurred might all have been marked on these visual records. Distinguishing between practical geographical information and mythological landscape would be difficult, if not impossible, from our modern perspective, and indeed the two categories might not have been clearly separated in Ice Age thought systems. A spring marked as important because it was believed to be inhabited by a water spirit might also be genuinely important as a reliable water source, and the spiritual significance might have served as a mnemonic device ensuring the location would be remembered and its importance respected. Throughout the 20th century, many researchers attempted to develop comprehensive theories that would explain cave art in its entirety, offering single explanations that could account for all the diverse examples and that would allow the paintings to be systematically interpreted. These grand theories ranged from the hunting magic hypothesis already mentioned, to structuralist interpretations that saw the paintings as expressions of binary oppositions fundamental to human cognition, to shamanistic theories that interpreted the caves as portals to the spirit world, and the paintings as records of trance visions experienced during altered states of consciousness. Each of these theories captured some aspects of cave art effectively, but struggled to account for all the evidence, and none achieved universal acceptance among researchers in the field. The map hypothesis represents another attempt at comprehensive explanation, but it need not be seen as mutually exclusive with other interpretations. The paintings might simultaneously serve multiple functions, encoding practical geographical information while also functioning as religious or ceremonial art, and as expressions of human creativity and the urge to make permanent marks on the world. The challenge is to determine which aspects of the paintings encode practical information, how that information is structured, and what methods we use to encode it. In other words, we need to crack the code to find the key that unlocks the information potentially hidden in these images. One promising approach involves looking for regularities and patterns at a scale larger than individual caves. By creating databases that catalogue all known cave paintings with detailed information about their locations, dates, subjects, styles, and contexts, researchers can perform statistical analyses looking for correlations and associations that might not be apparent when examining individual sites in isolation. These large-scale analyses have already revealed some interesting patterns, such as the fact that certain combinations of animals appear together far more often than chance would predict, that certain abstract symbols correlate with particular types of animal images or with specific positions within caves, and that the density and complexity of paintings vary systematically with factors such as the accessibility of the cave chambers and the richness of the archaeological deposits, indicating intensity of human use. Computational approaches, including machine learning and pattern recognition algorithms, are now being applied to cave art, with computers trained to identify and classify images, detect subtle similarities between paintings that human observers might miss, and to search for hidden structures in the spatial distributions and associations of paintings. These methods have the potential to reveal patterns that are too complex or subtle for human researchers to detect through traditional methods of observation and analysis, but they also run the risk of finding spurious patterns in random noise if not carefully controlled and validated. The challenge is to strike a balance between open-minded exploration that might reveal genuinely surprising discoveries and rigorous skepticism that prevents us from seeing patterns where none truly exist. Interdisciplinary collaboration is essential for progress in understanding cave art as potential maps. Art historians and archaeologists bring expertise in the cultural and historical context of the paintings and in the methods for documenting and analysing them. Geologists and paleoclimatologists can reconstruct the ancient landscapes and environments. Computer scientists can develop and apply sophisticated analytical tools. Cognitive scientists can offer insights into human perception and memory and how information is encoded and retrieved in visual form. Mathematical physicists can analyze the geometric relationships and spatial structures, and perhaps most importantly, collaboration with indigenous peoples who maintain living rock art traditions can provide insights into how such systems actually function in practice, how knowledge is encoded and transmitted, and what the paintings mean to the people who create and use them. To understand whether Ice Age peoples could have created and used map-like systems encoded in cave paintings, we need to understand their cognitive capabilities and their ways of thinking about space and place. For much of the history of archaeology and anthropology, there was a tendency to underestimate the intelligence and sophistication of prehistoric peoples, to assume that modern humans are somehow more evolved or more capable than our ancestors. However, this view has been thoroughly debunked by decades of research showing that anatomically modern humans have had essentially the same brain size and structure for at least 200,000 years and probably longer. The people who painted the caves had the same cognitive potential as people today, the same capacity for abstract thought, symbolic reasoning, planning, and problem solving. What differed was not their capacity to think, but the content of their thoughts, the knowledge they possessed, and the cultural frameworks through which they understood the world. Their expertise lay in areas utterly different from those valued in modern industrial societies. An Ice Age hunter could track an animal through terrain that would leave a modern person completely lost, could predict the weather from subtle signs in clouds and wind, could remember the locations of hundreds of resource patches across vast territories and recall when each would be productive, and could identify the species, age, health, and likely behavior of an animal from the briefest glimpse or from tracks and other signs. These are sophisticated intellectual skills requiring extensive knowledge, careful observation, complex reasoning, and excellent memory. Skills that were essential for survival and that were likely developed to a far higher degree than in most modern humans who no longer depend on such knowledge. The spatial memory and navigational abilities of mobile hunter-gatherers are legendary among researchers who have worked with traditional societies. People who live by moving through large territories develop extraordinary abilities to remember landscapes in detail, to maintain accurate mental maps of vast regions, and to navigate with precision using landmarks, celestial cues, and dead reckoning. They can describe routes through complex terrain, record the locations of specific features they have not visited in years, and create sand drawings or other ephemeral maps to communicate spatial information to others. These abilities suggest that Ice Age peoples would have been fully capable of creating permanent maps in caves had they chosen to do so, and indeed their spatial knowledge and navigational skills might have been considerably superior to those of modern peoples who rely on GPS and digital maps rather than memory and direct observation. The question of whether Ice Age peoples possessed the abstract concepts necessary for map making is more difficult to answer. Map making requires understanding that a two-dimensional image can represent three-dimensional space, that symbols can stand for real objects and places, that spatial relationships can be preserved at different scales, and that directions and distances can be encoded in consistent ways. These are not trivial cognitive achievements, and they might seem to require a sophisticated understanding of representational systems. However, even this hurdle might be lower than it initially appears. Children as young as 3 or 4 years old can understand simple maps and use them to navigate, suggesting that the basic concept of symbolic spatial representation is intuitive rather than requiring extensive cultural learning. If the caves themselves served as three-dimensional models of territory rather than as surfaces for two-dimensional maps, then the conceptual leap required becomes even smaller, perhaps amounting to nothing more than marking specific locations within a familiar space with images of what can be found there. The role of language in creating and using cave maps is another important consideration. Did Ice Age peoples possess fully developed languages with complex grammar and extensive vocabularies? And if so, how would language have interacted with visual representations? Current evidence suggests that fully modern language capabilities probably evolved at least 100,000 years ago and possibly much earlier, meaning that the cave painters would have had language as sophisticated as any modern tongue. With language, they could have named places, described routes, given instructions, told stories about past journeys, and passed on knowledge through oral traditions. Visual representations like cave paintings would have complemented and reinforced this oral knowledge, serving as memory aids and as teaching tools that could be used to instruct younger generations or to refresh the memories of adults who had not visited certain locations in a long time. Among the various theories proposed to explain cave art, the shamanistic interpretation has gained considerable traction in recent decades, particularly following the work of researchers who have compared cave paintings with the art produced by shamanic cultures around the world and with the visual experiences reported by people in altered states of consciousness. According to this theory, the caves were used as sites for shamanic rituals in which individuals would enter trance states, often with the aid of rhythmic drumming, chanting, dancing, sensory deprivation, or psychoactive substances, and during these trances they would experience visions that they subsequently recorded on the cave walls. The animals, abstract symbols and composite creatures found in cave art are interpreted as representations of these visionary experiences, with the deeper and more difficult to reach parts of caves corresponding to deeper levels of trance and more profound spiritual experiences. The shamanistic theory can be reconciled with the map hypothesis if we consider that shamanic journeys might have been understood not as purely internal psychological experiences, but as actual travels through spiritual landscapes that paralleled and interconnected with physical landscapes. In many shamanic traditions, the shaman's spirit is believed to leave the body during trance and to travel through worlds that are simultaneously real and symbolic, encountering animal spirits, visiting distant places, obtaining information, and bringing back knowledge that can be practically useful for the community. If Ice Age peoples held similar beliefs, then the paintings might represent both spiritual journeys and geographical information, with the spiritual interpretation providing the framework that gave meaning and power to the practical geographical knowledge encoded in the images. This integration of spiritual and practical would not have seemed contradictory to Ice Age peoples, who likely did not separate the world into distinct realms of physical and spiritual, natural and supernatural, in the way that modern Western thought tends to do, in animistic belief systems, which were probably prevalent among Ice Age peoples as they are among most traditional hunter-gatherer societies. Animals are understood as persons with their own perspectives and agencies. Landscapes are inhabited by spiritual beings, and the boundary between human and animal is permeable and frequently crossed. In such a world-view, creating images of animals in caves could simultaneously honor the animal spirits, encode practical knowledge about where and how to hunt them, and record shamanic visions of encounters with those spirits in the dream world. The altered states of consciousness that might have been induced in the caves through sensory deprivation, rhythmic stimulation, or psychoactive substances could have served multiple functions. They might have been part of religious rituals connecting humans with spiritual powers, but they might also have been memory techniques, ways of encoding knowledge in forms that would be more easily recalled later. Many traditional societies use modified states of consciousness as learning tools. Finding that information acquired or reviewed during these states is remembered more vividly and can be accessed more readily than information learned in ordinary consciousness. If Ice Age peoples discovered that knowledge encoded in cave paintings during ritual experiences was more effectively retained and passed on, this would have provided practical motivation for the creation and use of painted caves, regardless of whether the spiritual beliefs associated with the practices were literally true or were cultural frameworks that happened to support effective knowledge transmission. The artwork itself shows some features consistent with the altered states of consciousness hypothesis. Some images include geometric patterns and abstract forms, similar to the entoptic phenomena that people commonly see in early stages of trance, patterns generated by the visual cortex itself rather than by external stimuli. Some animals are depicted with internal organs visible, or with features that blend characteristics of different species, creating composite creatures that might represent visionary experiences rather than observed reality. Some figures seem to show transformation, with human and animal features merging, which is a common theme in shamanic experiences, where the shaman takes on animal form or encounters beings that shift between human and animal identities. However, these features are relatively uncommon in cave art, with the vast majority of images being straightforward naturalistic depictions of animals that show no obvious signs of being visionary or hallucinatory in origin. Whether or not cave paintings functioned as maps in a strict sense, they almost certainly served as memory devices, external storage for information that was too important to trust entirely to human memory, and that needed to be preserved across generations. Human memory, while remarkable in many ways, is also fallible and limited. Memories fade with time, details become confused or distorted, and knowledge dies when the people who hold it die, unless that knowledge has been passed on to others. In oral cultures without writing, the transmission of knowledge depends on teaching and learning, on older generations instructing younger ones, on people remembering what they have been taught and passing it on in turn. Any system that can augment human memory and make knowledge transmission more reliable and effective would have tremendous survival value. The caves themselves, as permanent features of the landscape, provide stability that human memory cannot match. A cave will remain in the same location for thousands or millions of years, and images painted on its walls, if protected from weathering and disturbance, can persist for tens of thousands of years. This permanence allows knowledge to be deposited in a location where it can be retrieved later, even after everyone who created it has died, even after the original context and purpose have been forgotten. The cave becomes a library, an archive, an external hard drive for human knowledge, limited in its storage capacity and difficult to access compared to modern information systems, but nonetheless serving the crucial function of preserving information beyond the lifespan of individuals. The paintings make use of multiple memory principles that cognitive psychologists have identified as effective for encoding and retrieving information. Visual memory is generally stronger than verbal memory for many people, with images being easier to remember than words or abstract concepts. The paintings create vivid, concrete visual images that would have been easier to remember than purely verbal descriptions. The use of spatial location as an organizing principle is another effective memory strategy, with different pieces of information associated with different locations in the cave, allowing the physical act of moving through the cave to cue the retrieval of associated knowledge. This is the same principle underlying the method of loci or memory palace technique, an ancient memory method that is still taught and used today. The emotional and sensory experiences associated with visiting the caves would also have enhanced memory formation. Entering a dark cave by flickering torchlight, navigating through narrow passages, experiencing the acoustic effects and the cool, damp air, seeing the paintings emerge from darkness into the circle of light, all of these sensory experiences would have created strong emotional responses that cognitive research shows are crucial for forming durable memories. Events that occur during emotionally arousing experiences are remembered more vividly and for longer periods than emotionally neutral events. If visits to the caves were embedded in ritual practices that heightened their emotional significance, this would have further enhanced their effectiveness as memory devices. The social context of learning from cave paintings would have added another layer of memory reinforcement. If paintings were used as teaching tools, with elders bringing young people to the caves and explaining the meanings of the images, telling stories associated with them, describing the places and events they documented, then the social interaction and the relationship between teacher and student would have reinforced the learning. The paintings would become associated not just with abstract information, but with specific people and events, with the memory of being in the cave with a particular elder who told particular stories, and these personal memories would serve as retrieval cues, helping to recall the information throughout life. Around 15,000 years ago, the climate began to warm, marking the beginning of the end of the Ice Age. The massive ice sheets that had covered so much of the northern continent began to retreat, melting slowly at first and then with increasing rapidity. The sea level began to rise, gradually flooding the coastal plains that had existed during the coldest periods. The landscapes transformed, with the open tundra and grassland of the Mammoth Steppes giving way to shrublands, and then to forests as temperatures rose and precipitation patterns changed. These environmental changes profoundly affected the animals that had been adapted to Ice Age conditions, and many of the large herbivores and predators began to decline in numbers as their preferred habitats shrank and fragmented. The extinction of the Ice Age megafauna remains one of the great mysteries of prehistoric times, with debate continuing about the relative roles of climate change and human hunting in driving these animals to disappearance. What is clear is that by about 10,000 years ago, most of the large animals that had dominated Ice Age ecosystems were gone. Mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant deer, cave lions, cave bears, and many other species that had survived previous climate cycles extending back millions of years, all vanished within a relatively short period. Their extinction removed from the landscape the very animals that had been the primary subjects of cave paintings, creatures that Ice Age peoples had lived alongside and depended upon for tens of thousands of years. As the megafauna disappeared and the landscapes changed, human societies adapted, developing new strategies for making a living in the altered environments. In many regions, people shifted from primarily hunting large game to more diverse subsistence patterns. that included smaller animals, fishing, and increased gathering of plant foods. These changes in subsistence were accompanied by changes in settlement patterns, social organization, and cultural practices. Some groups became more sedentary, establishing villages where previously there had been only temporary camps, particularly in regions where salmon runs or other concentrated resources allowed people to remain in one place. Other groups continued mobile lifestyles but moved through different territories and on different schedules than their Ice Age ancestors. The tradition of creating paintings in deep caves came to an end during this period of transition from the Ice Age to the modern world. The most recent firmly dated cave paintings are around 10,000 years old, and after that time, while rock art traditions continued in many places, they took different forms and appeared in different locations. The deep caves that had been decorated over so many thousands of years were apparently abandoned for their original purposes, no longer serving whatever functions they had held during the Ice Age. This abandonment might simply reflect the disappearance of the animals that had been the primary subjects of the paintings, making the paintings no longer relevant. Alternatively, it might indicate that the knowledge encoded in the paintings, whether maps of territories or records of spiritual journeys or something else entirely, had become obsolete as the landscapes and ecosystems transformed. The loss of context that came with the abandonment of the caves means that whatever systems of meaning and interpretation had allowed Ice Age peoples to create and use the paintings were not passed down to later generations. The knowledge of how to read the paintings, if they indeed encoded information in systematic ways, was lost. When modern humans rediscovered the caves, we encountered the paintings as enigmas, beautiful and evocative but silent, their meanings locked away by the gulf of time. We can admire them, analyze them, measure them, photograph them, and catalogue them, but we cannot simply read them as Ice Age peoples could have done. We are in the position of archaeologists from a distant future finding a library, but not knowing any of the languages in which the books are written, able to recognize that these objects were important and contained information, but unable to access that information directly. While the painted caves of Ice Age Europe are the most famous and extensively studied examples of prehistoric rock art, they are far from unique. Similar traditions of creating images on rock surfaces appear in every inhabited continent, spanning enormous ranges of time from the Ice Age to the present day. These rock art traditions take many forms, including paintings, engravings, and carvings, and they appear in diverse contexts from deep caves to open-air sites on cliff faces, boulders, and rock overhangs. The subjects depicted vary with local environments and cultures, but often include animals important to the people who created them, along with human figures, abstract symbols, and geometric patterns. The similarities across these diverse traditions suggest that rock art serves fundamental human needs and functions that transcend particular cultures and time periods. The rock art of the Aboriginal Australians represents perhaps the longest continuous artistic tradition in human history, extending back at least 40,000 years and continuing to the present day in some communities. This art includes explicit maps showing the locations of water sources, travel routes between them, and territorial boundaries, often embedded within larger compositions that incorporate Dreamtime stories connecting the landscape to mythological events from the creation period. The artists and the communities that maintain these traditions possess the knowledge needed to interpret the maps, understanding the conventions by which geographic information is encoded, and being able to use the rock art practically for navigation and resource location. This living tradition demonstrates conclusively that rock art can function as a mapping system and provides valuable insights into how such systems might work. In southern Africa, the rock art created by San peoples over thousands of years shows remarkable similarities to European cave art in its sophisticated naturalistic depictions of animals and its inclusion of abstract symbols and geometric patterns. Research conducted in collaboration with San communities has revealed that much of this art relates to shamanic practices and depicts experiences during trance states, but it also encodes ecological knowledge about animal behavior and locations. The integration of spiritual and practical knowledge in sandrock art provides a model for how we might understand European cave paintings as simultaneously serving religious and utilitarian functions without contradiction. The rock art of the Americas includes examples dating back at least 13,000 years, appearing soon after humans first arrived in the Western Hemisphere. Some of these early sites show clear associations with Ice Age animals, including extinct species of horses, camels, and ground sloths, that were present when humans first entered the continent. As in Europe, the extinction of these large animals coincides roughly with changes in rock art traditions, suggesting that the art was closely connected to the specific environments and animal communities that existed during its creation. Later rock art in the Americas shows enormous diversity, reflecting the wide range of cultures and environments across two continents. But recurring themes include the depiction of important animals, the marking of sacred or significant places, and the recording of important events or journeys. These parallel traditions from around the world provide comparative data that can inform our interpretations of European cave art. They show us the range of functions that rock art can serve, the ways that geographical information can be encoded visually, the roles that rock art can play in marking territory and significant locations, and the methods by which knowledge can be preserved and transmitted through visual media. They also remind us that rock art is not a single phenomenon with a single meaning, but rather a flexible medium that can be adapted to many purposes depending on the needs and cultural contexts of the people creating it. The same piece of rock art might simultaneously serve as a map, a religious symbol, a territorial marker, a teaching tool, and an aesthetic expression, with different aspects of its meaning and function being emphasized in different contexts or for different viewers. The development of new technologies in recent decades has revolutionized the study of cave art, allowing researchers to document, analyze, and interpret the paintings in ways that would have been impossible using only traditional archaeological methods. High-resolution photography and photogrammetry enable the creation of extremely detailed images of the paintings that can be studied without repeatedly visiting the fragile cave environments, reducing the risk of damage from human presence. Three-dimensional scanning technologies capture not just the paintings themselves, but also the exact contours of the cave walls, allowing researchers to study how the artists used natural features of the rock surfaces and to create virtual models of the caves that can be explored digitally from anywhere in the world. Chemical analysis techniques, including X-ray fluorescence, Raman spectroscopy, and infrared imaging, can determine the composition of pigments without damaging the paintings, revealing information about what materials were used, where those materials might have come from, and how they were processed and applied. These analyses have discovered that the pigments in some paintings include ingredients that came from locations hundreds of kilometers from the caves, implying either long-distance travel by the artists or extensive trade networks that allowed rare materials to be obtained from distant sources. The effort invested in obtaining special materials for particular paintings suggests that those paintings held exceptional importance, perhaps marking especially significant information or particularly sacred images. Dating techniques have become increasingly sophisticated and precise, allowing researchers to establish detailed chronologies for cave paintings and to understand how the use of caves changed over time. By dating not just the paintings themselves, but also the archaeological deposits in the caves, including charcoal from torches, bone tools, and traces of human occupation, researchers can correlate the creation of paintings with evidence of human activities and environmental conditions, building up complex narratives of how people used the caves across thousands of years. These chronologies have revealed that some caves were used intensively during certain periods and then abandoned for centuries or millennia before being used again, suggesting that the functions of caves might have changed in response to shifting populations, environmental conditions, or cultural practices. Geographic information systems and spatial analysis software allow researchers to map the distributions of caves and paintings across landscapes, and to analyze the spatial relationships between caves and other features such as rivers, mountain passes, resource locations, and habitation sites. These analyses have revealed that painted caves are not randomly distributed, but occur in patterns that correlate with features of the ancient landscape, often positioned along routes that would have been natural pathways for seasonal migrations or travel between important locations. This patterning supports the hypothesis that caves were deliberately chosen for painting based on their positions relative to the territories people used, consistent with caves serving as waypoints or repositories for geographical knowledge. Computer vision and machine learning algorithms are beginning to be applied to cave art, with systems trained to automatically detect, classify, and analyze paintings. These systems can identify features that are too subtle or complex for human observers to notice, can compare thousands of images to find patterns and similarities, and can process data at scales that would be impossible manually. Early applications have already yielded interesting results, including the discovery that some apparently blank areas of cave walls actually contain faint paintings visible only in certain light conditions or wavelengths, and the identification of consistent geometric relationships in the positioning of paintings that might represent intentional organizational schemes. As these technologies continue to develop, they may reveal structures and patterns in cave art that finally unlock the information encoded there. The interpretation of cave art has never been purely academic, but has always been influenced by broader social and political contexts, by the assumptions and biases of the researchers conducting the studies, and by the uses to which interpretations are put outside the scholarly realm. Different theories about what cave art means and what it tells us about Ice Age peoples have risen and fallen in popularity, not only because of new evidence, but also because they aligned with or contradicted prevailing ideas about human nature, progress, art, and society. Understanding this political dimension is important for evaluating claims about cave art and for recognizing that the map hypothesis, like other interpretations, carries implications that extend beyond the narrow question of what the paintings represent. In the early days of cave art research, there was considerable resistance to the idea that Ice Age peoples could have created sophisticated art at all. When the first painted caves were discovered in the late 19th century, many scholars dismissed them as frauds, unable to accept that prehistoric savages could have produced work of such quality. This resistance reflected racist assumptions about the intellectual capabilities of non-European peoples and evolutionary notions that placed modern Western civilization at the apex of human achievement, with all previous societies seen as inferior precursors. Only gradually, as more caves were discovered and the authenticity of the paintings became impossible to deny, did scholars begin to accept that Ice Age Europeans had been capable of artistic expression and perhaps possessed intellectual capabilities comparable to modern humans. Even after the reality of cave art was accepted, interpretations continued to be shaped by assumptions about the primitiveness of Ice Age peoples. The hunting magic theory, which dominated for much of the 20th century, portrayed Ice Age peoples as superstitious and magical in their thinking, unable to make clear distinctions between representation and reality, believing that painting an animal on a wall could somehow magically ensure success in hunting that animal. While this interpretation acknowledged the artistic skill evident in the paintings, it still maintained an implicit hierarchy with modern rational thought, superior to primitive magical thinking. The map hypothesis, by contrast, credits Ice Age peoples with practical intelligence, systematic knowledge organization, and sophisticated information management capabilities, abilities that are harder to characterize as primitive or inferior to modern practices. The political implications of different interpretations extend to contemporary issues of indigenous rights and cultural heritage. In many parts of the world, rock art sites are important to living indigenous communities who maintain cultural and spiritual connections to these places. and who assert rights to control access to them and to participate in decisions about their management and interpretation. When researchers propose interpretations of rock art that ignore or contradict indigenous knowledge and perspectives, this can be seen as a continuation of colonial practices that dismissed indigenous peoples as primitive and claimed authority over their cultural heritage. Conversely, when researchers work collaboratively with indigenous communities and take their knowledge seriously, this can lead to richer and more accurate interpretations, while also respecting indigenous rights and dignity. The question of who has the right to interpret cave art and how it should be studied is thus not merely academic, but involves issues of power, representation, and respect. Ice Age Europeans have no living descendants who maintain cultural continuity with them, no indigenous communities who can speak for them or assert traditional rights to their heritage. This absence means that Ice Age cave art is arguably the common heritage of all humanity rather than the specific heritage of any particular group. But it also means there are no indigenous voices to provide alternative perspectives or to challenge interpretations proposed by Western scientists. We must therefore be especially careful to recognize the limitations of our perspectives and to remain open to multiple possible interpretations, rather than prematurely closing off alternatives. The animals depicted in Ice Age cave paintings are not a random sample of the fauna that existed in the environment, but rather a carefully curated selection that provides clues about what mattered most to the people who created the paintings. Horses are the most commonly depicted animal across the corpus of European cave art as a whole, followed by bison, with mammoths, deer, ibex and aurochs also appearing frequently. Meanwhile, reindeer, which were probably the single most important food source for many Ice Age groups based on the abundance of reindeer bones in archaeological sites, are relatively rare in the paintings. This discrepancy between what was painted and what was eaten suggests that the paintings were not simply documenting hunting success or expressing wishes for future kills, but were encoding some other kind of information about these animals. One possibility is that the painted animals represent species that were important for reasons beyond food value. Horses, while certainly hunted and eaten, were also notable for their speed, beauty, and social organization in large herds. They might have been observed as indicators of environmental conditions, since horses are sensitive to vegetation changes, and their movements would track the availability of good grazing. Knowing where horse herds were located and how they were moving might have provided information useful for predicting seasonal changes or for locating other resources associated with similar habitat types. Bison similarly were not just food, but massive, powerful, and potentially dangerous animals whose behavior would have been carefully studied. The repeated pairing of horses and bison in cave paintings might indicate that these two species were found together in particular habitats or seasons, and the pairing might serve as a mnemonic for remembering associated environmental conditions. Mammoths present a particularly interesting case because they appear frequently in cave paintings, but were probably not hunted regularly by most human groups, being enormous, dangerous, and perhaps too valuable alive to risk killing. Living mammoths would have been important to Ice Age peoples as landscape engineers whose feeding activities created and maintained the open grassland environments that supported the herds of other animals that humans did hunt regularly. Mammoths also served as walking resource depots, with their ivory, bones and hides being valuable materials that could be obtained from animals that died naturally or that were scavenged. The presence of mammoth images in caves might mark territories where mammoths were known to occur. Information valuable for locating this important resource, even if living mammoths were not actively hunted. The predators depicted in cave paintings are almost exclusively large and dangerous species, including cave lions, cave hyenas, and occasionally cave bears and wolves. Smaller predators such as foxes, wildcats, and martens are absent, or extremely rare despite being common in the environment, and occasionally hunted for their fur. This pattern suggests that the painted predators were significant not as food or fur sources, but perhaps as dangers to be aware of, as competitors for prey animals, or as spiritually powerful beings whose images carried special significance. If caves served as maps, the inclusion of predator images might mark territories where these dangerous animals were known to den or hunt, information that could be life-saving for people travelling through unfamiliar country. Birds appear in cave art much less frequently than mammals, but when they do appear, they are often depicted with care and accuracy. Species that can be identified include owls, waterfowl, and some birds of prey. The relative rarity of birds might simply reflect their lesser importance to people who depended primarily on large mammals. Or it might indicate that birds were associated with particular types of information or locations. Birds might have been observed as indicators of seasonal changes through their migrations, or as signs of water in the case of waterfowl, or as omens or spirit messengers in the belief systems of Ice Age peoples. The appearance of specific bird species in particular contexts might encode subtle information that we have not yet learned to read. If cave paintings functioned as information storage and educational tools, then the physical layout and accessibility of different parts of the cave systems might have been designed to support specific learning processes. Educational psychologists recognize that the difficulty of accessing information affects how and when it is learned, with easily accessible information being learned first and more frequently reinforced, while information that is harder to access might be reserved for later learning stages or for individuals who have demonstrated particular skills or commitment. The variation in accessibility of different painted chambers within cave systems might reflect a deliberate structuring of knowledge into levels, with basic or frequently needed information in accessible locations, and more specialized or advanced knowledge hidden in deeper, more difficult to reach areas. This structure would parallel initiation systems found in many traditional societies where knowledge is not all taught at once but is parceled out over time, with individuals gradually gaining access to deeper levels of knowledge as they mature and prove themselves worthy. The process of physically penetrating deeper into the earth to reach the most hidden paintings could have served as a metaphor and a test for the intellectual and spiritual journey of gaining deeper knowledge. The challenges involved in reaching remote chambers, the darkness and disorientation of navigating complex passages, the fear and excitement of entering the underworld, all of these experiences would have made the knowledge found in those places more memorable and more precious, earned through effort and courage rather than casually received. The size and layout of painted chambers might also have been chosen to accommodate different types of activities. Large chambers with good acoustic properties might have served as gathering spaces where groups assembled for ceremonies or teachings, with the paintings serving as visual aids for lessons taught through oral instruction, song, or ritual performance. Smaller chambers accessible only to one or a few people at a time might have been places for individual vision quests or contemplation, where a person could study particular paintings in solitude and internalize their meanings without distraction. The narrowest passages decorated with single images might have been thresholds or tests, places where individuals had to overcome fear or physical challenge to prove their readiness to proceed further and access more knowledge. The sequential experience of moving through a cave, encountering paintings in a particular order dictated by the cave's architecture, might have been designed to present information in a specific pedagogical sequence. Early paintings encountered near the entrance might introduce basic concepts or identify the subject matter of the cave, while paintings encountered progressively deeper might build on this foundation, adding complexity and detail, introducing relationships between elements, and finally presenting integrative knowledge that synthesizes what has been learned. This would be analogous to the structure of a book, where chapters are arranged in a logical sequence that guides the reader from simple to complex, from particular to general, or from familiar to novel. The use of natural features of the caves as integral parts of the educational system might have created a kind of environmental learning, where knowledge was embedded in the physical experience of place, the feeling of particular passages, the sounds in particular chambers, the temperature, humidity, the quality of light from torches. All of these multisensory experiences would have become associated with specific knowledge, creating rich mental context for memory encoding and retrieval. When individuals needed to recall certain information, they might mentally revisit the cave, remembering the experience of being in particular locations and using those memories as retrieval cues to access the associated knowledge. Ice Age peoples did not live in isolation, but were connected through social networks that spanned vast distances and through which information, materials, and people moved. Archaeological evidence reveals that even during the coldest periods of the Ice Age, there were long-distance connections between different regions, with shells from the Atlantic coast found hundreds of kilometers inland, high-quality flint from specific sources distributed across wide areas, and similarities in artistic styles and technical innovations appearing in sites separated by considerable distances. These connections imply the existence of social networks maintained through periodic gatherings, intermarriage between bands, trading partnerships and other relationships that allowed people to maintain contact even while living far apart most of the time. If painted caves functioned as information repositories, then they might have been shared resources accessible to multiple bands or groups who travelled through particular territories. A cave positioned along a major travel route or near an important gathering place might have accumulated paintings created by different groups over time, each adding their own knowledge to the collective archive. The paintings might have served as a common language, allowing groups with different spoken languages or dialects to share information, with standardized symbols and conventions that could be understood across linguistic boundaries. This would have been particularly valuable in regions where multiple groups traveled or where territories overlapped and where communication, despite language differences, was necessary for maintaining peace and coordinating activities. The maintenance and updating of painted caves might have been a collective responsibility, with different groups contributing to the preservation and expansion of the knowledge stored there. Groups passing through might add new paintings documenting recent observations or discoveries, might restore fading older images to ensure their continued visibility, or might add marks indicating they had visited and verifying that the information was still accurate. Over time, this collective maintenance would create complex palimpsests where multiple layers of information were superimposed, with newer knowledge built on foundations laid by earlier generations, creating accumulations of wisdom that no single individual or group could have compiled alone. The locations of painted caves might have been strategic choices made to maximize their accessibility to multiple groups, while minimizing the risk of conflict over control of these valuable knowledge repositories. Caves located in boundary zones between territories or in neutral territories that were not claimed by any particular group might have served as commons, shared spaces where different groups could meet peacefully to exchange information and maintain social relationships. The deep interior locations of many painted chambers might have provided security, making it difficult for any single group to monopolize access or to destroy the paintings in conflict, since entering the deep caves required knowledge of the passages and the ability to navigate in darkness, skills that might have been shared selectively to maintain cooperation. The breakdown of these knowledge-sharing networks at the end of the Ice Age might help explain why the tradition of painting deep caves came to an end. As the climate warmed and the megafauna declined, human populations might have become less mobile, more anchored to particular locations where they developed new subsistence strategies based on fishing, fowling, and intensive plant gathering rather than following the migrations of large herbivores. This reduced mobility would have disrupted the long-distance social networks that had previously connected different regions, making it harder to maintain collective knowledge repositories and reducing the need for shared information about territories that people no longer traveled through. The caves might have been abandoned not because the knowledge they contained became irrelevant, but because the social systems that had created and maintained them collapsed under the pressures of environmental change. Throughout the centuries since the cave painting tradition ended, rumors and legends have persisted about lost knowledge, hidden wisdom, and ancient secrets waiting to be rediscovered. These legends take many forms across different cultures, but a common theme is that the ancients possessed knowledge or capabilities that have been lost, knowledge that might be recovered if only we could find the right key, decipher the right code, or understand the right symbols. The rediscovery of the painted caves in the 19th century seemed to fulfill these legends, revealing that ancient peoples had indeed left remarkable legacies hidden in the earth, but the meanings of these legacies remained frustratingly elusive. The dream of decoding the cave paintings and recovering the lost knowledge they might contain continues to motivate researchers who dedicate their careers to studying these ancient images. This dream is not merely academic, but carries emotional and philosophical weight, representing a desire to connect with our distant ancestors, to understand how they saw the world, to learn what they deemed important enough to preserve, and perhaps to recover wisdom that might be relevant to our own lives. In an age of environmental crisis, the possibility that Ice Age peoples possess deep ecological knowledge about how to live sustainably with nature holds particular appeal. If we could recover that knowledge from the cave paintings, we might find guidance for addressing the challenges we face in our relationship with the natural world. However, we must be cautious about projecting our own desires and assumptions onto the painted caves. The romantic notion of ancient wisdom can lead us to see what we want to see rather than what is actually there, to interpret ambiguous evidence as supporting our preferred theories, and to resist alternative explanations that are less emotionally satisfying. The paintings might contain nothing more than they appear to be on the surface, beautiful depictions of animals created by people who loved them, and whose survival depended on understanding them. Or they might encode information that is simply too culturally specific to be recoverable from our modern perspective. Knowledge that made perfect sense to Ice Age peoples, but that is inaccessible to us not because we lack intelligence or technology, but because we lack the lived experience and cultural context that gave the paintings meaning. Even if we cannot fully decode the cave paintings or prove definitively whether they functioned as maps, the attempt to understand them provides value by forcing us to think carefully about Ice Age peoples, their lives, their environments, and their intellectual capabilities. The exercise of trying to see the world through their eyes, to imagine what problems they faced and how they solved them, to appreciate the sophistication of their knowledge and skills, enriches our understanding of human history and human potential. It reminds us that intelligence and creativity are not recent developments but have been fundamental characteristics of our species for tens of thousands of years, expressed in different ways according to different circumstances, but always present. The technologies we are developing to study cave paintings might eventually provide answers to questions that have puzzled researchers for generations. Machine learning systems trained on vast databases of paintings might detect patterns that reveal organizational principles. Chemical analysis might identify materials that came from specific locations, allowing us to trace connections between caves and landscapes. Three-dimensional modeling might reveal geometric relationships that correspond to actual geographical features, or we might develop entirely new approaches that we cannot yet imagine. Just as researchers a century ago could not have imagined the technologies we use today, the mystery of the painted caves remains open, inviting new generations of scholars to bring fresh perspectives and new tools to the ancient question of what these images meant to the people who created them. Regardless of whether Ice Age cave paintings functioned as maps, their legacy to us is unquestionable. These paintings are among the oldest surviving works of human artistic expression, connecting us directly to ancestors who lived 30,000 years ago, people we will never meet but whose thoughts and experiences left tangible marks on stone that we can still see and touch. This connection across such vast spans of time is profound and moving, reminding us that we are part of a species with a long and deep history, that the people who came before us were not fundamentally different from us, but shared our capacities for thought, feeling, creativity, and the urge to leave something permanent behind. The paintings force us to confront the impermanence of human knowledge and the difficulty of passing information across generations when the context that gives that information meaning is lost. How much of what we know today will be comprehensible to people 30,000 years in the future? What will archaeologists of that distant age make of our ruins if they lack access to our languages, our cultural assumptions, and the technological context that makes so much of our world meaningful? This perspective should inspire humility about our own wisdom and caution about assuming that we understand ancient peoples better than they understood themselves or better than they were capable of understanding. At the same time, the paintings demonstrate the human drive to create meaning and to communicate, to take what is ephemeral and make it permanent, to share knowledge and experience not just with our contemporaries, but with unknown future generations. The artists who painted in the caves could not have known that their work would survive for tens of thousands of years, or that people from cultures unimaginably different from their own would study their paintings and try to understand them. Yet they painted anyway, investing time and effort and skill, presumably because the act had value in their own time and for their own purposes, but also perhaps because they sensed that some things deserve to be preserved, that knowledge and beauty and meaning are precious and should not be allowed to vanish without a trace. The ongoing efforts to preserve and study the painted caves represent our own version of this drive to protect what is valuable and to pass it on to future generations. Many painted caves are now carefully managed to minimize damage from environmental changes, erosion, or excessive visitation, with access restricted to protect the paintings while still allowing research and limited public viewing. Digital documentation creates permanent records that will outlast the physical paintings, ensuring that even if the originals are eventually lost to time and entropy, copies will survive to show future generations what existed. These preservation efforts reflect our recognition that the caves belong not just to us, but to all of humanity across all time, that we are temporary custodians of a heritage we inherited and must pass on. The painted caves also challenge us to think about the multiple forms intelligence can take and the diverse ways humans can solve the problems of existence. Ice Age peoples lacked writing as we understand it, lacked mathematics and science as we practice them, lacked most of the technologies we take for granted, yet they survived and thrived in environments far more challenging than most of us will ever experience. They developed sophisticated knowledge systems adapted to their needs and circumstances, knowledge expressed through art, ritual, story and memory rather than through books and databases, but no less real or effective for that difference. Recognizing the intelligence and capability of Ice Age peoples does not diminish our own achievements, but rather expands our understanding of what human intelligence can be. As we near the end of this journey through the depths of time and stone, it is worth reflecting on what the question that opened our exploration really asks of us. What if Ice Age cave paintings are maps of a lost world? This question invites us not just to consider a specific hypothesis about ancient art, but to open ourselves to wonder, to allow for possibilities beyond what we have been taught, to recognize that the world holds mysteries that have not yet been solved and perhaps never will be. It challenges us to look at the familiar with fresh eyes and to imagine that what we think we understand might be only the surface of deeper realities. The feeling of wonder is valuable in itself, not merely as a motivator for scientific investigation, but as a fundamental human experience that connects us to something larger than ourselves. When we stand before a cave painting created 30,000 years ago, we are touching across time, recognizing our kinship with people long dead, feeling the presence of human consciousness that looked at the same images when the ice still covered the land and the mammoth still walked. This feeling of connection and mystery enriches our lives regardless of whether we ever fully understand what the paintings meant to their creators. The map hypothesis offers one possible answer to the mystery of cave paintings, but it is not the only answer, and perhaps not the complete answer. The paintings likely served multiple purposes, meaning different things to different people in different contexts, their significance changing over the thousands of years they were created and used and remembered. We do not have to choose between understanding them as maps, or as religious art, or as aesthetic expressions. They might have been all of these, and more, operating on multiple levels simultaneously in ways that made sense to Ice Age peoples, even if they seem contradictory to us with our tendency to categorize and separate. What matters most is not whether we can definitively prove any particular interpretation, but whether we approach the paintings with respect, curiosity, and humility, recognizing them as the products of human minds as capable as our own, valuing them for what they are regardless of whether we can fully understand them, and preserving them for future generations who might have insights we lack. The paintings have survived for tens of thousands of years, waiting patiently in darkness, and they can wait longer still for understanding if that understanding ever comes. They do not need us to solve them to have value. Their existence alone is remarkable. As you drift deeper into sleep, let your mind wander through the caves we've explored together, seeing the animals emerge from stone in flickering torchlight, feeling the presence of the ancient artists, imagining the world they knew and the knowledge they encoded in images that have outlasted their makers by 300 centuries. Let the mystery remain mystery, beautiful and compelling precisely because it is not fully solved, inviting wonder and imagination and dreams. Perhaps in dreams you might walk the lost landscapes of the Ice Age, following the migrations of vanished herds, meeting the people who painted the caves, and learning directly from them what their images meant and what they were trying to tell us across the vast gulf of time. There exists a space between knowing and not knowing, a borderland where certainty gives way to possibility and where questions matter more than answers. This is the space inhabited by the study of Ice Age cave paintings, where each new discovery seems to complicate the picture rather than simplify it, where each answered question spawns 3 new ones, where the more we learn, the more we realize how much remains unknown. This borderland can be frustrating for those who seek definitive answers, but it can also be exhilarating for those who embrace uncertainty as an invitation to continued exploration and creative thinking. Living with uncertainty requires intellectual humility, a willingness to hold multiple possible explanations simultaneously without committing prematurely to any single one, and the ability to change our minds when new evidence warrants. These are not qualities that come naturally to most people, as our minds evolve to seek patterns and construct explanations that make the world predictable and manageable. Ambiguity creates discomfort that we are motivated to resolve, even if resolution requires ignoring contradictory evidence or oversimplifying complex situations. In the study of cave paintings, this tendency toward premature closure has led to decades of debate as proponents of different theories defend their positions against alternatives, sometimes losing sight of the evidence itself in their enthusiasm for particular interpretations. The map hypothesis represents one attempt to resolve the ambiguity and make sense of patterns that are not easily explained by earlier theories, but it too must be held lightly, treated as a possibility to explore rather than a truth to defend. If evidence emerges that contradicts the map hypothesis, that evidence should be welcomed rather than resisted, because it moves us closer to understanding, even if it means abandoning ideas we found appealing. The goal is not to prove ourselves right, but to understand the paintings as fully as possible. And that understanding might require us to accept that they are more complex, more multifaceted, or simply more foreign to our ways of thinking than we wanted to believe. The interdisciplinary nature of modern cave art research helps to maintain this productive uncertainty by bringing together scholars from different fields with different perspectives, methods, and assumptions. When archaeologists, art historians, cognitive scientists, geologists and computer scientists all study the same paintings, they ask different questions and notice different patterns, and the resulting conversations can be illuminating even when they do not produce consensus. Each discipline contributes pieces of the puzzle, but no single discipline can see the whole picture, and the edges where disciplines meet are often where the most interesting insights emerge. Collaboration with indigenous peoples who maintain living rock art traditions has been particularly valuable in opening new interpretive possibilities and challenging Western academic assumptions about what rock art is and how it functions. These collaborations reveal that rock art can operate according to logics quite different from those familiar to Western scholars, encoding information and meaning in ways that require cultural knowledge to interpret, serving functions that integrate spiritual and practical concerns in ways that resist the Western tendency to separate them, and maintaining relevance and meaning across thousands of years not as static monuments to the past, but as living documents that continue to be created, used, and reinterpreted by successive generations. One of the most poignant aspects of studying Ice Age cave paintings is the awareness of all that has been lost, all that we will never know because the voices of the artists are silent and the cultures that gave the paintings meaning have vanished, leaving no direct descendants. We can study the paintings themselves, analyze their chemical composition, measure their positions, compare them statistically, but we cannot ask the artist what they meant, cannot watch them being created, cannot participate in the ceremonies or teachings associated with them, cannot hear the songs that might have been sung or the stories that might have been told in the painted chambers. We are outsiders looking in, separated by an unbridgeable gulf of time. The languages spoken by Ice Age Europeans are lost, leaving no traces in modern tongues, no written records to decode, nothing but the potential encoded in the paintings themselves if they do indeed contain linguistic information in visual form. Without knowing the languages, we cannot know what names were given to the places and animals shown in the paintings, what stories explained their significance, what instructions guided their use. We are trying to read a book in an unknown language from a culture about which we know almost nothing, and our interpretations are necessarily tentative and likely incomplete at best. Fundamentally mistaken at worst. The religious beliefs and philosophical worldviews of Ice Age peoples are similarly lost to us. We can make educated guesses based on comparisons with better known traditional societies and on general principles of human cognition and culture, but these remain guesses that might or might not capture how Ice Age Europeans actually thought and felt. Their metaphysics might have been entirely different from anything we can imagine, organized around concepts we lack, or perceiving distinctions we do not make, or collapsing categories we think of as separate. The meanings they attributed to the cave paintings were embedded in these lost worldviews, and recovering those meanings might be impossible without recovering the worldviews themselves. Even the social structures and political organization of Ice Age societies remain largely mysterious. We know they lived in small mobile bands and that multiple bands gathered periodically for larger aggregations, but we do not know how these bands were organized internally, how leadership functioned, how decisions were made, how conflicts were resolved, or how knowledge and resources were distributed. The creation and use of cave paintings would have been embedded in these social structures, and their meanings might have varied depending on who was viewing them, with different people having access to different levels or types of knowledge, depending on their age, gender, status, or initiation into particular traditions. Without understanding these social dimensions, our interpretations remain partial. Yet despite all these limitations and all that has been lost, the paintings themselves remain silent witnesses carrying information across millennia even if we struggle to interpret it. They are messages from the deep past. And even if we cannot fully read them, we can recognize them as messages and honor them as such. The very existence of the paintings tells us that Ice Age peoples valued permanence and communication, that they invested effort in creating records that might outlast them, that they possess symbolic thought and artistic skill, and the desire to leave their mark. These recognitions, even without detailed understanding, connect us to our ancestors and affirm our common humanity. As we look ahead to the future of cave art research, several trends and possibilities emerge that might transform our understanding in coming decades. Advances in technology will continue to provide new tools for documentation, analysis, and interpretation, with each new method potentially revealing information that was previously hidden or inaccessible. Artificial intelligence and machine learning seem particularly promising, with the potential to detect patterns too subtle or complex for human recognition, and to correlate vast amounts of data from multiple sources in ways that might finally crack the code if there is indeed a code to crack. The development of more sophisticated methods for reconstructing ancient environments and ecosystems will provide better context for interpreting the paintings, allowing us to understand with greater precision what the landscapes around the caves looked like when the paintings were created, what animals lived where, what plants were available, and how all of these changed over time in response to climate shifts. This environmental context might allow us to test the map hypothesis more rigorously by comparing what the paintings show with what we know about the actual distribution of resources and animals in the ancient landscape. Increased international collaboration and data sharing might reveal patterns that are only visible when analysing the complete corpus of cave art across multiple countries and regions. Individual caves or regions might not show clear evidence of systematic organisation or mapping, but when analysed at continental scale, patterns might emerge that demonstrate standardization and coordination across vast distances. Such patterns would strongly support the hypothesis that cave art functioned as a shared information system used by multiple groups across large territories. The discovery of new painted caves continues to occur, with recent decades seeing the finding of spectacular sites that have expanded our knowledge and challenged previous assumptions. Each new cave provides additional data and potentially new pieces of the puzzle. Some of these caves might be better preserved than previously known sites, or might contain features that make their functions more obvious or their meanings more accessible. The most spectacular discovery of all would be a cave where the paintings were still actively being created and used when the tradition ended, potentially containing evidence of the final paintings or even written explanations if Ice Age peoples were beginning to develop writing systems as the Ice Age ended. Perhaps most importantly, future research might benefit from approaches that are more open-minded and less constrained by traditional disciplinary boundaries or theoretical frameworks. If we can approach the cave paintings with genuine curiosity rather than with predetermined theories to defend, if we can collaborate across disciplines and cultures rather than maintaining artificial separations, if we can combine rigorous scientific analysis with creative imagination and respectful humility, then we might achieve insights that have eluded previous generations of researchers. The paintings have waited 30,000 years for understanding. They can wait a bit longer for the right questions to be asked in the right ways. Time at the scale represented by cave paintings is difficult for human minds to grasp. 30,000 years is so far beyond individual human experience that it becomes almost abstract, a number without concrete meaning. We can say the words, we can write the numbers, but we struggle to feel the weight of such immensity, to truly comprehend the vast gulf separating us from the artists who created these images. This is deep time at geological rather than human scales, and learning to think in deep time changes our perspective on ourselves and our place in the world. Each painting in a cave represents a moment when a person stood in darkness, prepared pigment, raised a hand or brush, and applied colour to stone. That moment was as real and immediate to that person as this moment is to us. They felt the cool cave air, smelled the smoke from their torch, heard the sounds of their breathing and movement echo from the walls. They had thoughts, intentions, memories, hopes and fears. They were fully human, fully alive, fully present in their experience. And then that moment passed and became history, and then became ancient history, and then became prehistory so remote that we can barely imagine it. Yet the mark they made on the stone remains, connecting that vanished moment to our present across all the intervening centuries. Multiplied across the thousands of paintings in hundreds of caves, this becomes a kind of immortality, not for the individuals who painted, but for the fact of their existence, their capabilities, their cultures. Each generation that painted in the caves added its layer to the accumulating archive, probably unaware that their work would survive for tens of thousands of years, simply doing what their culture taught them to do, fulfilling their roles, passing on knowledge, participating in traditions that connected them to their own ancestors, and that they hoped would connect to their descendants. The chain of generations stretched backward into time beyond memory, and forward into an unknown future, and the paintings were links in that chain, tangible connections binding past to future. We are now part of that chain, receivers of what the cave painters left behind, even if we cannot fully understand it. Our responsibility is to protect what remains, to study it with respect and rigour, and to pass it on to those who will come after us. In our own time, we add our layer to the accumulating story of these paintings, documenting them with technologies the original artists could not have imagined, interpreting them through theoretical frameworks born of our own cultural moment, preserving them against threats that did not exist when they were created. Future generations will look back on our efforts just as we look back on earlier researchers, and they will judge how well we fulfilled our responsibility as custodians of this irreplaceable heritage. Thinking in deep time also provides perspective on our current moment and our own concerns, the problems that seem overwhelming to us, the crises that dominate our news and our conversations, the anxieties that fill our days. All of these will pass into history just as the Ice Age passed into history. The climate change we face, while serious and demanding our attention, is only the latest in a long series of climate changes that life on Earth has survived and adapted to. The social and political upheavals of our time, while consequential for us, are mere moments in the vast sweep of human history. This perspective does not diminish the importance of addressing current challenges, but it does remind us that human resilience and adaptability have carried our species through previous crises that seemed equally insurmountable at the time. As you sink deeper into sleep, as consciousness dissolves and dreams begin to form, imagine that you are not merely sleeping but travelling backward through time, each breath carrying you further into the past, each heartbeat marking centuries, millennia, tens of millennia flowing by. The modern world falls away, cities and roads and fields vanishing, replaced by wilderness, forests giving way to grassland and tundra, the temperature dropping as ice advances from the north. You are moving through the landscape and through time simultaneously, watching as the land changes and changes again, seasons cycling faster than your eye can follow, generations of animals coming and going, birth and birth again in endless succession. In this dreamlike journey, you find yourself approaching a cave, drawn by something you cannot name, a pull toward the darkness within. You enter, and the darkness is not frightening but welcoming, wrapping around you like a familiar embrace. Somewhere deep in the earth ahead, a light flickers, and you move toward it through passages that seem to know your footsteps, that guide you without effort deeper and deeper into the stone. The air grows cool and still, and the sounds of the outside world fade until there is only silence and your breathing and the whisper of your movement. You round a corner and enter a chamber where a figure crouches by torchlight, arm raised to the wall, painting. You cannot see their face, but you know somehow that they are aware of your presence, that they expected you, that they have been waiting across 30,000 years for someone to come and see what they are creating. The torch flickers, and the painted animals on the walls seem to move. Horses running, bison lowering their massive heads, mammoths raising their trunks. The chamber is alive with motion and presence, filled with the spirits of animals long extinct and peoples long gone, but preserved here in ochre and charcoal and memory. The painter turns to you, and without words, without sound, you understand what they are telling you. These paintings are maps, yes, but not only maps of the physical world. They are maps of knowledge and memory, maps of relationships between humans and animals and land, maps of the stories that explained how the world came to be and how to live well within it. They are maps of time as well as space, showing not just where things are but when they were and when they will be, encoding the cycles of seasons and migrations and lives. They are maps of the spirit world and the physical world, which were never separate but always interpenetrating, each reflecting and containing the other. You reach out to touch the painting, and your hand passes through it into another time, another place, another reality. You find yourself standing on a vast plain, under a sky filled with more stars than you have ever seen. So many stars that they cast shadows, that they illuminate the landscape in a ghostly silver light. In the distance, a herd of mammoths moves across the grassland, their forms massive and dark against the starlit snow. You can hear their rumbling calls, feel the ground vibrate with their footsteps. Closer by, a smaller group of people gathers around a fire, their faces painted with the same ochre used in the caves, their voices rising in a song that seems to be part of the wind and the stars and the calling of the mammoths. They are singing the world into being, singing the paths they will travel tomorrow and the next day and across all the tomorrows that stretch ahead into an unknown future. They are singing the boundary between sleep and waking, between past and present, between memory and imagination, grows thin as gossamer in this dreaming space. You find that you can move through the Ice Age landscape with the freedom of thought, travelling vast distances in moments, seeing through the eyes of different creatures and different peoples. You watch from above as bands of humans follow the migrations of reindeer across tundra that will one day be covered by cities, as they gather at sacred places to trade and feast and arrange marriages, as they venture into caves to paint and sing and teach their children the knowledge needed for survival. Each cave becomes a node in a vast network spreading across the land, connected by invisible threads of kinship and knowledge and memory. Information flows through this network, carried by travelers who move between groups, by stories told at gathering places, by the songs that encode roots and resources and relationships. The painted images serve as anchors for this flowing knowledge, permanent repositories that can be consulted when memory fails or when disputes arise about where things are or what happened in the past. Different groups maintain different caves, but they share conventions and symbols that allow each group to read what others have written in stone. You see now that the caves do not map a static landscape, but a living one that changes through time. The paintings accumulate in layers as generations add their observations, sometimes painting over earlier images when conditions change, sometimes leaving older paintings visible as records of how things used to be. A cave might show mammoths in one chamber because mammoths were abundant when that part was painted, and then show their absence in another chamber painted centuries later when the mammoths had moved away or declined in numbers. The entire cave system becomes a kind of time-lapse photograph of the changing world, readable by those who understand the chronology of different sections and styles. In this dream map, you understand that the distinction between literal and symbolic, between map and metaphor, would have been meaningless to Ice Age peoples. Painting of a bison might simultaneously represent actual bison in a specific location. The concept of bison in general, the spirit or essence of bison as a sacred being, and perhaps also a particular season or direction or quality that was associated with bison in the symbolic system of the culture. All of these meanings could coexist without contradiction, and someone viewing the painting would access whichever meanings were relevant to their immediate purpose, whether they were planning a hunt, or performing a ceremony, or teaching a child, or seeking a vision, the handprints scattered among the animal figures begin to glow in your dream vision, and you understand them as signatures across time. Personal markers saying, we were here, we saw this, we knew this, we passed this way. Each print is a moment of presence, a gesture of connection between the individual and the ages. The hands that made these prints rotted into earth 30,000 years ago. The bones crumbled to dust. Every cell and atom of the person scattered and recycled into other forms. But the print remains. The shape of the hand preserved in pigment on stone. It is a kind of resurrection, a way of being present beyond death, beyond forgetting, a message that says simply, I was real, I lived, I mattered, remember me. The dream begins to shift as sleep deepens, and you find yourself moving back through time again, but now travelling forward instead of backward, returning to the present, watching as the Ice Age world transforms, the climate warms, and the ice retreats. The sea level rises and swallows the coastal plains. The great herds dwindle and vanish. The mammoths disappear one by one until only their bones remain, and then even the bones are buried or destroyed. The caves that were living knowledge centres become tombs of forgotten wisdom, visited rarely and then not at all, their entrances obscured by rockfalls or overgrown by vegetation, their interiors left to darkness and silence. Tens of thousands of years pass in moments. New peoples come who know nothing of the paintings or who see them but do not understand. Languages change and change again until no relationship remains between the modern tongues and those spoken by the cave painters. Agriculture arrives and transforms the landscape. Forests are cleared, cities rise, technologies proliferate. The pace of change accelerates faster and faster, until reaching the modern era where more change occurs in decades than occurred in millennia during the Ice Age. And then comes the rediscovery, the moment when modern humans venture into the caves and find the paintings waiting. The shock of recognition, the awe and wonder, the immediate understanding that something profound and important has been found, even if its specific meaning remains unclear. The paintings emerge from darkness into light, photographed and documented, and studied and argued over, becoming famous, drawing visitors from around the world who come to see these ancient windows into the past. The caves become treasures, protected and cherished, no longer functional in their original purposes, but valued now as heritage, as art, as mystery. You see researchers standing before the paintings with their instruments and notebooks, trying to understand, developing theories, making measurements, arguing their interpretations. You see tourists entering in small, carefully managed groups, gasping at the beauty and age of what they see, taking photos even though photos can never capture the experience of being there in the darkness with the stone and the paintings. You see children studying images of the paintings in books and on screens, learning about the Ice Age and the people who lived then, carrying knowledge of these ancient images into the future. And you understand that the paintings have succeeded beyond what their creators could have imagined. They wanted to preserve knowledge for future generations, to ensure that what they knew would not be lost, to leave messages that would outlast them. They succeeded. The specific knowledge they encoded might be inaccessible to us. The meanings they intended might be lost, but the paintings remain as testimony to their existence, their intelligence, their creativity, their humanity. We remember them not by name but collectively, and we honour them by trying to understand what they left behind. The paintings have become a gift across time, connecting Ice Age peoples to modern peoples, reminding us of our shared humanity and our shared tenure on this planet that is ancient beyond our reckoning. In the deepest part of sleep, in the most profound stillness of night, you find yourself in a chamber that exists outside of time. A painted cave that is somehow all painted caves, containing all the images ever created in darkness. The walls stretch away beyond vision, covered in layer upon layer of animals and symbols and handprints. Millions of images superimposed and interpenetrating, creating a visual symphony of staggering complexity. Yet somehow it is not chaotic but ordered, each image in its place, each mark contributing to a pattern that is just barely beyond comprehension, like a vast equation that you almost understand but that slips away when you try to focus on it. In this eternal chamber, all the cave painters throughout time are present simultaneously, working at different points on the walls, adding their contributions to the endless accumulation. You recognize that each painter is painting not just what they see, but what they remember, what they imagine, what they hope for, what they fear. The paintings are not separate from the painters, but extensions of them, externalizations of consciousness, ways of making the internal world visible and permanent. The chamber is a collective mind, the paintings are shared memories, and everyone who views them becomes part of the vast network of knowing that spans all the ages from the Ice Age to the present and beyond into the unknown future. You understand in this deep dream state that the question of whether the paintings are maps is less important than the recognition that they are connections. They connect humans to animals, present to past, individual to community, physical to spiritual, transient to eternal. They are maps in the broadest sense, not just showing where things are, but showing how things relate, what pathways exist between different domains of existence, what journeys are possible for those who know the way. The caves themselves are portals, thresholds between worlds, and the paintings are the keys that unlock passage between them. A profound peace settles over you as you realize that the mystery does not need to be solved, that the uncertainty is not a problem to be fixed, but a gift to be treasured. The paintings are more valuable because we do not fully understand them, because they remain mysterious, because they continue to provoke wonder and curiosity and imagination. If we decoded them completely, extracted all their information, reduced them to data points in a database, we would lose something essential, the sense of connection across time to minds we cannot fully know but that we recognize as kin. The chamber begins to fade as sleep carries you deeper still, beyond dreams and images and thoughts, into the pure darkness of profound rest where consciousness dissolves entirely. The last thing you see before everything fades is a single handprint glowing on the wall, and you know without knowing how you know that it is both the first handprint ever made in a cave and the last, both the oldest and the newest, both unique and universal. It is every hand that ever pressed pigment to stone, and it is also your hand, connecting you to all who came before and all who will come after. The hand waves in farewell or greeting, the gesture is the same, and then darkness comes and you sleep deeply and dreamlessly, resting in the eternal night that holds all stories, all memories, all paintings, all lives. As consciousness begins its slow return toward waking, as the deep restorative sleep of night gradually gives way to the lighter sleep of early morning, the dreams of caves and paintings and Ice Age landscapes fade, but leave behind something that persists. You carry within you now a new awareness of the depth of human time, the complexity of ancient minds, the profound skills and knowledge of peoples who lived so long ago that they seem almost mythical, but who were as real and as capable as anyone alive today. The question of whether Ice Age cave paintings are maps of a lost world remains open, neither definitively answered nor dismissed, but the exploration of that question has taken you on a journey through time and thought that has value regardless of the final answer. The cave paintings remind us that human beings have always sought to understand their world, to preserve knowledge, to communicate across distances and generations, to create beauty and meaning in the face of mortality and uncertainty. These fundamental drives shape the behavior of Ice Age peoples just as they shape our behavior today, expressed through different media and technologies, but arising from the same essential human nature. We are map makers by instinct, creating representations of reality that help us navigate not just physical space, but conceptual space, social space, temporal space. Whether drawn on cave walls or stored in digital databases, whether encoding routes through tundra or paths through knowledge, maps are tools we have always made and always will make because they extend our cognitive reach beyond what we can hold in memory alone. The lost world of the Ice Age exists now only in fragments of evidence scattered across the landscape, and in the reconstructions we build from those fragments. The cave paintings are among the most vivid and immediate of those fragments, direct products of human hands and minds from that distant time, carrying information that might allow us to recover aspects of that lost world if only we could learn to read them properly. Even if the map hypothesis proves incorrect and the paintings served other primary functions, they still map something, even if only the distribution of animals in the ancient environment, or the territories of the peoples who created them, or the structure of Ice Age thought and belief systems. They are windows into the past that allow us to see, however imperfectly, into a world and a time that no longer exists except in memory and imagination. As you drift in that liminal space between sleeping and waking, not quite in either state but partaking of both, you might find yourself thinking about the maps you carry in your own mind, the mental representations you have built of your world, your life, your relationships, your knowledge. You might realize that these internal maps are not so different from what Ice Age peoples might have been creating on cave walls. Externalized versions of internal realities, attempts to take what is fluid and invisible and make it stable and visible. You might recognize that every story you tell, every description you give, every explanation you offer is a kind of map, a representation that points toward reality but is not identical with it, that simplifies and selects and interprets, that serves purposes beyond mere accuracy. The cave paintings have survived for 30,000 years because they were protected by darkness and stone, hidden away from the weathering effects of sun and rain and wind, preserved in stable environments where temperature and humidity changed little over millennia. The maps we carry in our minds are far more fragile, lasting only as long as we live unless we find ways to externalize them, to preserve them in forms that outlast our individual existence. Writing serves this function, as does art, as does teaching, as does any act of communication that passes knowledge from one mind to another. We are all cave painters in our own ways, trying to leave marks that will persist, trying to share what we know and what we have experienced, trying to connect across the boundaries that separate us from each other and from the past and future. The final lesson of the cave paintings, whether or not they are maps, is that the human urge to preserve and communicate is stronger than time itself. 30,000 years is a length of time almost beyond imagination, longer than all of recorded history, longer than the existence of agriculture and cities and writing and everything we think of as civilization. Yet the paintings persist, and they speak to us still, even if we struggle to understand their language. They prove that impermanence is not inevitable, that carefully protected in the right circumstances, things can last for periods that dwarf human lifespans, that we can leave messages for the future that will be found and valued even by peoples we cannot imagine, who live in worlds we cannot predict. Sleep deeper now, rest fully, let the stories and images and questions settle into your mind where they will work beneath consciousness, making connections and associations and insights that might rise to awareness later, or might simply change how you see the world in subtle ways you never consciously notice. The caves will remain, the paintings will persist, the mystery will continue to invite exploration by future generations of researchers who will bring their own questions and tools and perspectives. You have been there in dreams, you have walked through the darkness and seen the animals on the walls and felt the presence of the ancient artists. You carry that experience within you now as a kind of memory, though you were never physically there, and that memory connects you to the vast web of time and consciousness that includes all who've ever wondered about these paintings, or marveled at their beauty, or tried to understand their meanings. The world above the caves continues its ceaseless change, seasons cycling, years accumulating into decades and centuries and millennia, new species evolving as others go extinct, continents drifting, mountains rising and eroding away, ice ages coming and going. But deep beneath the surface, in the darkness beyond sunlight's reach, the paintings wait patiently, marking time in their own way, preserving something of the Ice Age world and the peoples who knew it. They are maps, perhaps, or memories or dreams made solid, or prayers or lessons, or all of these and more. They are what they are, and they have been there far longer than we have been trying to understand them, and they will be there far after we are gone. Sleep now, and let them watch over your dreams, these ancient images that have witnessed the passing of so many nights, so many sleepers, so many dreamers drifting through the darkness toward morning.